My son, my 12-year-old son, Leo, was on the ground, motionless. His face was pale, his lips already tinged with blue. And next to him, lying on the grass like a discarded piece of trash, was his heart. Not his biological heart, of course. That muscle had failed him years ago. This was the Thornton Model 7 ventricular assist device, a marvel of biomedical engineering that pumped blood through his body, kept him alive, and was currently lying disconnected beside him, its primary cannula tube ripped clean from the port. The custom-built backpack that housed it was torn open, a strap sheared in two. I was on my knees in an instant, my world shrinking to the few feet of grass between my son and his lifeline. The training kicked in before the panic could. 10 years as a Special Forces medic, an 18 Delta, teaches you to compartmentalize. You build walls in your mind. Fear goes in one box, grief in another. The mission stays outside, clear and cold. My mission was Leo. The paramedics were good, fast, but they were trained for trauma, for car wrecks and heart attacks, not for this. This was specialized. They were about to move him, to load him onto the gurney. "Stop," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It's a tone I'd used 1,000 times before, in situations where a shaky voice gets people killed. The lead paramedic, a guy with a thick mustache and tired eyes, looked at me, his hands hovering over Leo. "Sir, we need to move." "No," I said, pointing at the device. "His VAD is a Thornton Model 7. You can't just reconnect it. You need to reprime the cannula before re-establishing the power link, or you'll throw an air embolism straight into his aorta. He'll be dead before you close the ambulance doors." The paramedic stared at me, then at the complex piece of machinery on the grass. He didn't understand, but he understood my certainty. That's when I saw her. Brenda McMillan. She was standing about 20 feet away, next to a police officer who'd just arrived. She wasn't looking at my son. She was looking at me. Her face, framed by a helmet of perfectly lacquered silver hair, was a mask of cold, righteous fury. She was 58 years old, the president of the Sunset Creeks Estates Homeowners Association, and she ruled our neighborhood with the unblinking tyranny of a despot. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "He did this," she said to the officer, her voice carrying across the silent park. It was low, controlled, and utterly convincing. "I saw it. He's been claiming the boy is sick for months to get out of HOA dues. He must have staged this for a lawsuit when I came to confront him about his violations." I couldn't process the words. It was like listening to a foreign language. My son was dying, his chest was still, and this woman, this monster, was manufacturing a lie that painted me as his murderer. The police officer, a young guy named Miller, who I'd seen around, took a step toward me, his hand resting on his sidearm. His eyes were full of suspicion. The narrative was already setting in. A desperate father, a sick kid, a potential insurance scam. It was clean, simple, and monstrously wrong. The older paramedic, the one with the mustache, knelt beside me. "You're medical?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't take my eyes off Leo. "Special Forces medic, 18 Delta," I said. "Now get me the sterile saline and a 10cc syringe from your kit. Now." He didn't hesitate. He turned and relayed the order to his partner. In that small moment of obedience, a flicker of my old world asserted itself. The world of competence, of professionals who listen to the man with the expertise. But it was just a flicker. The new world was Brenda's, a world of whispers, accusations, and the absolute authority of a petty tyrant in a crisp white blazer. The ambulance finally pulled away, its siren a scream that tore through the afternoon. They had managed to get him stabilized enough for transport, but the damage was done. 12 minutes without circulation. 12 minutes where his brain was starved of oxygen. The officer, Miller, had told me to stay put. He was treating me like a suspect. I stood there, watching the ambulance disappear, my hands covered in the faint, sticky residue of medical gel. And I looked at Brenda McMillan, who was now giving her official statement, her expression one of grave, concerned civic duty. They didn't just rip the heart out of my son's chest. They tried to pin the murder on me. What they were about to find out is that you don't corner a man who spent 10 years in special operations, especially when that man designed the very machine they broke. They thought they were targeting a grieving father. They had no idea they were taking on the system itself. Stick with me, and I'll show you how I dismantled their entire empire, piece by technical piece. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in that exact moment. To understand how we got here, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up in this house. Not just this neighborhood, this exact house. My great-grandfather, a corporal in the 101st Airborne, built it in 1946 on a 5-acre plot of land he bought with his discharge pay. He built it with his own hands, oak and stone, a testament to survival. The deed, nearly 80 years old now, sits in a safe deposit box downtown. It's a piece of history, a connection to a man I never met but whose legacy I lived in. The neighborhood, Sunset Creek's estates, didn't exist then. It was just fields and a small creek. Our family land stretched all the way down to that creek, the same one that now snakes through the community park where Leo collapsed. I joined the Army at 18, not out of patriotism, but out of a need for structure, for a challenge that felt real. I tested into the Special Forces qualification course and found my calling as an 18 Delta, a Special Operations Combat Medic. People think of medics as the guys who slap on bandages. An 18D is different. We're trained to be one-man emergency rooms. We learn everything from battlefield trauma and dentistry to veterinary medicine and sanitation. For 10 years, I operated in places that don't show up on maps, responsible for the lives of my 11-man ODA team. I remember one night in the Hindu Kush, a firefight under a moonless sky, our comms sergeant, a kid from Ohio named Peters, took a round to the chest. It collapsed his lung. We were pinned down, miles from any support. In the flickering light of muzzle flashes, with bullets cracking overhead, I performed a needle thoracostomy, inserting a 14-gauge needle between his ribs to relieve the pressure and reinflate his lung. I kept him alive for 6 hours until the medevac could get to us. That's the world I came from. A world of absolute stakes, where your knowledge and your nerve were the only things that mattered. When I retired, that world felt distant. I came home, back to my great-grandfather's house. I used the GI Bill to get a master's in biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins. My focus was singular, circulatory assist devices. I wanted to build things that saved lives, not just patch people up after the damage was done. That's how Leo came into the picture. My son was born with a congenital heart defect, a condition that left his left ventricle weak and failing. By the time he was 8, he was in heart failure. The doctors told me he needed a transplant, but the waiting list was years long. The alternative was a VAD. I immersed myself in the technology, and my master's thesis became my full-time obsession. I got a job at Thornton Medical, one of the leading firms in the field. For 3 years, I was part of the team that developed the next generation of pediatric VADs. I wasn't just some cog in the machine. I was a lead designer. My name is on 3 key patents for the device's power-to-flow regulation system, the very system that keeps the blood moving at a precise, constant rate. The engineers at the firm nicknamed the prototype the Thorn model. The production model was the Thornton 7, the same one that now lay broken on the grass. I was a single dad. Leo's mom had left when the medical bills started piling up, a reality I'd come to accept. It was just me and him. And for a while, things were good. The VAD gave him his life back. He could run, play, be a kid. I was known in the neighborhood. I was the quiet guy in the old stone house. I organized the neighborhood watch, not because I was some gung-ho vet, but because it just seemed like the right thing to do. I'd help Mrs. Gable next door with her garden and fix the fence for the Millers across the street. We were part of the community. Then, 2 years ago, Brenda McMillan got elected president of the HOA. She'd been a real estate broker who'd lost her license over some shady dealings, and she saw the HOA as her own personal fiefdom, a way to claw back some of the power and prestige she'd lost. And from the beginning, she had her sights set on us. It started small, an anonymous note in our mailbox about the unpleasant humming sound coming from our property. It was Leo's backpack, the cooling fan for the VAD's battery. Then came the official violation letters. Unauthorized electronic equipment in common areas. Failure to maintain aesthetic uniformity. She was building a case, brick by brick. I tried to reason with her. I submitted the official medical exemption paperwork from Leo's cardiologist, complete with schematics and a letter explaining that the device was life-sustaining. She ignored it. In her eyes, a boy's life was a bureaucratic inconvenience, a violation of the rules. And in Brenda McMillan's world, the rules were all that mattered. Brenda wasn't just a power-hungry homeowner. She was the center of a web of corruption that had its tendrils in every part of our town's administration. Her power wasn't just in the HOA bylaws, it was in her connections. Her most potent weapon was her affair with Robert Henderson, the town's chief of police. Henderson was a man whose ambition had long outstripped his integrity. He was lazy, corrupt, and completely beholden to Brenda. In exchange for her companionship, he let her use his officers as her personal enforcers. A car parked an inch too far onto the sidewalk? She'd have a patrol car there within the hour, lights flashing, to intimidate the homeowner. Kids playing street hockey? She'd call in a noise complaint, and Henderson would dispatch a unit to shut it down. This was why Officer Miller had so readily accepted her story at the park. To him, I wasn't a frantic father. I was just another nail for Brenda's hammer. This explained everything. It was an open secret among the few residents who dared to whisper about it. This was why she operated with such impunity. She had the law in her pocket. But her network didn't stop there. She had turned the HOA into a criminal enterprise. The bylaws required any exterior modifications, painting, roofing, landscaping, to be done by a list of HOA-approved contractors. It was a short list. The roofing company was owned by her brother. The landscaping service belonged to her brother-in-law. The painting contractor was her cousin. Every single one of them charged a 30% premium over market rate, and a portion of that premium went directly into Brenda's pocket. It was a classic kickback scheme, hidden in plain sight. If you dared to use an outside contractor, she would fine you into submission, day after day, until you complied. She was bleeding the community dry, and no one had the power to stop her. I wasn't her first victim. I was just the one she decided to make an example of. I learned later about the others. There was Marcus Thorne, a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, no relation to me. He had installed a 20-foot flagpole in his front yard to fly the American flag, just as he had at every house he'd ever lived in. Brenda cited him for violating a rule about yard structures exceeding 12 feet in height. He fought her, citing his right to display the flag. She buried him in legal fees, putting a lien on his house until he was forced to take the pole down. He sold the house 6 months later, a defeated man. Then there was the Sandoval family. Their youngest son had severe autism, and they had built a small sensory garden in their backyard, a quiet space with a water feature and textured plants. Brenda claimed it violated the aesthetic uniformity clause of the covenants. She fined them $200 a day. They fought for as long as they could, but the fines mounted. They had to declare bankruptcy and lost their home in foreclosure. Brenda bought it at auction through a shell LLC and flipped it for a profit. She didn't just enforce the rules, she weaponized them for personal gain. She targeted people she perceived as weak, people who wouldn't fight back. A veteran, a family with a special needs child, and a single father with a medically fragile son. We were perfect targets. Her campaign against us was a slow, methodical siege. It began 6 months before the incident at the park. First, the anonymous notes. Then, the official letters, printed on the HOA's heavy cream-colored letterhead, delivered by certified mail. Violation of Section 12B, unauthorized equipment. Violation of Section 19C, persistent auditory disturbance. I responded to each one with a copy of the doctor's letter and the federal ADA guidelines that protected Leo's right to his medical device. She never acknowledged them. Her next step was public confrontation. If she saw Leo and me in the park, she would march over, clipboard in hand, and announce loudly that his backpack was a safety hazard and a liability to the community. She wanted to humiliate us, to turn the neighbors against us. But it didn't work. Most of our neighbors knew Leo, knew his story. They saw Brenda for what she was. So she escalated again. That's when she ripped the heart out of my son. She saw that public pressure wasn't working, that I wasn't backing down. So she decided to end it, to remove the problem herself. It was never about a backpack. It was about absolute control. It was about a woman so consumed by her own petty power that a child's life was nothing more than a line item in her list of violations. I was out on bail within hours. A friend from my unit, now a high-powered attorney in D.C., had a local bondsman on the phone before I'd even finished being processed. The charge was pending. Child endangerment, with a potential for something worse depending on Leo's condition. Brenda's statement had been taken as gospel. I was the prime suspect. The first thing I did when I got home was walk into my office and lock the door. The house was cold and silent, a tomb. My ex-wife was at the hospital with Leo. I was alone, but I wasn't idle. For the next 72 hours, I didn't sleep. I turned my home office, the place where I'd designed circuit boards and written code, into a command center. My new mission: dismantle Brenda McMillan's empire and make her pay for what she did. The first step was evidence. I retrieved the damaged VAD and backpack from the evidence locker at the police station. My lawyer had filed an emergency motion for its release on the grounds that it was critical medical hardware. Back in my office, I began a full forensic analysis. I mounted the sheared strap of the backpack under a digital microscope, the kind used for analyzing material stress fractures. I photographed the polymers, magnified 500 times. The tearing wasn't clean. It showed evidence of extreme torsional force, a violent, twisting yank. Using a strain gauge, I calculated the exact tensile strength of the strap material. The force required to shear it in that specific way was over 250 pounds per square inch. This wasn't an accidental snag. This was a deliberate, violent act. I compiled the data into a formal engineering report, complete with 3D stress simulations and a finite element analysis of the failure points. It was a document that would be indefensible in court, written with the cold precision of a man who knew the material better than anyone. But that only proved what happened. I needed to prove where it happened was just as important. Brenda's power came from the HOA, and the HOA's power came from the land it governed. I had a hunch, a nagging feeling based on old family stories my grandfather used to tell. The next morning, I was at the county records archive. It was a dusty, quiet place that smelled of old paper and decaying glue. I spent hours poring over old plat maps and property deeds, my fingers stained with ink and dust. And then I found it. A hand-drawn plat map from 1948, logged and filed by the county surveyor. It clearly showed the 5-acre plot belonging to my great-grandfather. And it showed a 2-acre section of it, the very section where the park now stood, deeded to the county. I pulled the corresponding deed. The language was archaic but clear. The land was donated as a public recreational trust, with a permanent deed restriction that it must remain open for the use and enjoyment of all citizens of the county. The Sunset Creek's HOA wasn't formed until 1986. They had no legal jurisdiction over that park. None. They had been illegally claiming authority, using HOA funds to maintain public land, and enforcing their petty rules on property that was never theirs to control. Brenda's entire confrontation with my son was based on a lie. That night, I made a call. General Marcus Thorne, no relation, just a cosmic coincidence, was my former ODA commander. He'd retired a few years after me and was now a Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. He picked up on the second ring. "Alex," he said, his voice the same calm baritone that had guided us through a dozen firefights. "What do you need?" There were no pleasantries. We weren't built that way. I laid it out like a mission briefing. The illegal assertion of authority, the pattern of harassment, the assault on my son, the false accusation, the corrupt police chief. I emailed him my engineering report and a scan of the 1948 plat map. He was silent for a full minute after I finished. "They messed with the wrong guy, Alex," he finally said. "This isn't just a local issue anymore. The medical device tampering puts it under FDA jurisdiction. The false arrest and conspiracy to violate your son's civil rights puts it squarely in our ballpark." He told me he was making 2 calls. The first was to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, specifically the section that handles violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The second was to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. "The feds are coming, Alex," he said before he hung up. "Lay low and let them work." I hung up the phone, the first glimmer of hope cutting through my rage. I wasn't just a father fighting an HOA anymore. I was an expert witness with the full weight of the United States government about to come down on my side. The war was just beginning. Brenda, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet, decided to escalate. She still had the local police in her pocket, and she used them to serve me with a temporary restraining order, barring me from the community park. The same park her HOA had no legal claim to. The order was based on her sworn statement that I was a violent and unstable individual who posed a threat to her safety. A few days later, a lien was placed on my house by the HOA's law firm for $50,000 in unpaid fines and legal fees related to my persistent violations. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to bleed me dry and force me to sell. But her masterstroke of cruelty came the following week. 2 caseworkers from Child Protective Services showed up at my door. They had received an anonymous tip. Brenda's voice was unmistakable on the recording, I would later find out, claiming that I was medically neglecting my son by using an experimental and unsafe VAD, and that I had likely caused the accident myself through improper maintenance. They wanted to interview me, to inspect my house, to talk to Leo at the hospital. They were threatening to take my son away from me while he was still fighting for his life in the ICU. That was the moment the community finally broke its silence. As the CPS workers stood on my porch, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a retired cardiac nurse, came marching across her lawn. "Are you out of your minds?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "I've known Alex Thorne for 15 years. I've seen him manage Leo's care with a precision and love that would put most hospitals to shame. That man is a hero, not a monster. Another neighbor, a young tech guy who lived across the street, had started filming the entire exchange on his phone. He didn't say a word, just stood there, his phone a silent witness. The video, showing 2 government agents trying to enter the home of a decorated veteran while his son lay in a coma, all at the behest of a vindictive HOA president, was uploaded to the local news station's Facebook page that evening. By morning, it had 10,000 views. A young, hungry reporter named Sarah Jenkins saw it and smelled a story. Brenda panicked. She had always operated in the shadows, her power derived from whispers and closed-door meetings. Now, a spotlight was on her. Sarah Jenkins started digging into the HOA's finances, calling the approved contractors and asking hard questions about their pricing. Then the real blow came. 2 quiet, unassuming men in suits showed up at the police station. They were from the Department of Justice. They presented Chief Henderson with a federal subpoena for all records, communications, and incident reports related to my case and any other enforcement actions taken on behalf of the HOA. Henderson, a bully who was only brave when he had the upper hand, crumbled. He called Brenda in a panic, telling her she was on her own. That night, a neighbor who lived across from the HOA's small community office saw the lights on late. Through the window, he saw Brenda and her brother, the roofer, frantically feeding documents into a shredder. He filmed it on his phone and sent the video to me. The cover-up was in full swing. The climax came during the deposition for the restraining order. It was held in a stuffy conference room at her lawyer's office. Me, my lawyer, Brenda, and her attorney, a slick, overconfident man named Peterson. His strategy was simple. Paint me as an arrogant, unqualified amateur playing doctor with his son's life. "Mr. Thorne," Peterson began, leaning back in his chair. "You are a biomedical engineer, is that correct? Not a medical doctor?" "That's correct," I said. "And yet, at the scene of the incident, you countermanded the instructions of trained paramedics. You seem to believe your knowledge of this complex medical device is superior to theirs." He was trying to bait me, to make me look arrogant. I stayed calm. "My knowledge is not superior," I said. "It is specific. I was an 18 Delta medic for 10 years. My job was to be the highest medical authority in the absence of a physician, but that's not why I knew what to do." Peterson smirked. "Oh? Then why is that?" He leaned forward, sensing a kill. "What makes you so uniquely qualified to make life or death decisions regarding the Thornton Model 7 VAD? I looked at him, then at Brenda, whose face was a mask of smug satisfaction. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a document. I slid it across the polished mahogany table. It was a certified copy from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. "I'm qualified," I said, my voice low and steady, "because U.S. patent number 7,834,011B, the patent for the device's primary power-to-flow regulator, lists me as the lead inventor. I didn't just study the machine, Mr. Peterson. I built it." The smirk vanished from Peterson's face. He picked up the document as if it were radioactive. Brenda stared at it, then at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The color drained from her face. In that moment, she finally realized she hadn't targeted a weak and grieving father. She had declared war on the one man she never should have crossed. The house of cards collapsed with breathtaking speed. My lawyer presented the 1948 plat map and deed to a superior court judge. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Esther Williams, took one look at the documents and immediately dissolved the restraining order, declaring the HOA's authority over the park null and void. She sanctioned Brenda's lawyer for filing a frivolous and malicious action. The $50,000 lien on my house was thrown out the same day. My engineering report on the damaged VAD was submitted to the district attorney's office as expert testimony. The DA, who had been dragging his feet under pressure from the police chief, now had irrefutable scientific proof of a violent assault. 2 days later, the federal hammer fell. At 6 a.m., a multi-agency task force executed 3 simultaneous search warrants. Black SUVs swarmed the neighborhood. Agents in windbreakers with FBI and FDA emblazoned on the back raided Brenda's home, the HOA community office, and Police Chief Henderson's office at the station. They seized computers, financial records, and the shredded documents, which were carefully bagged as evidence of obstruction of justice. The raid was the lead story on the evening news. The community, so long cowed into silence, watched in stunned disbelief as the untouchable queen of Sunset Creeks was revealed to be a common criminal. The legal reversal was absolute. The DA, now under investigation himself by the State Attorney General's office, dropped all charges against me. The next day, a grand jury, presented with the evidence from the federal raid and the testimony of the other families Brenda had victimized, handed down a sealed, multi-count indictment. The charges against Brenda McMillan were read aloud in court. Aggravated assault on a minor, reckless endangerment, insurance fraud, 6 counts of wire fraud related to the kickback scheme, perjury for her false statement in the restraining order, and obstruction of justice. Chief Henderson was indicted on charges of conspiracy and obstruction. They were both arrested that afternoon. Brenda's mugshot, stripped of her perfect hair and makeup, her face a mixture of shock and impotent rage, was a portrait of absolute defeat. The financial consequences were just as devastating. The Department of Justice, citing a pattern of systemic discrimination, hit the HOA with a 7-figure fine for its repeated violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. To Hoainsanity, IRS, alerted by the evidence of the kickback scheme, launched a full-scale forensic audit of the HOA's books and Brenda's personal finances. A federal judge placed the HOA's assets into receivership, freezing every bank account and seizing control of all property. Brenda's personal assets, her house, her luxury car, her investment accounts, were seized to cover the massive federal fines and to be held in escrow pending the outcome of my civil suit against her. In the span of a week, her entire empire, built on fear and corruption, had been wiped from the face of the earth. The trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The neighbor's video of her shredding documents, the sworn testimony of the contractors in her kickback scheme who had flipped on her for lighter sentences, the bank records showing the flow of money, and my own expert testimony complete with 3D models of the forces that had ripped my son's heart from his body. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. I was there in the courtroom when they read the verdict. Brenda sat at the defense table, a shrunken figure in a drab pantsuit. She stared straight ahead, her face a blank mask. "On the charge of aggravated assault," the foreman read, his voice echoing in the silent room, "we the jury find the defendant, Brenda McMillan, guilty." He repeated the word guilty for every single count. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. She just sat there as her life was erased. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in state prison. No parole. Chief Henderson got 10 years for his role in the conspiracy. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with the force of an avalanche. The Sunset Creeks HOA was formally dissolved by court order. Its charter was revoked by the state. The residents, free for the first time in years, voted to form a voluntary community association with a small annual fee to cover park maintenance and social events. The first official act of the new association was to reinstall the flagpole at Master Sergeant Thorne's house. The second was to help the Sandoval family rebuild their son's sensory garden. The power had been returned to the people, where it belonged. Brenda's downfall was complete. The story of her affair with the police chief became front-page news, a sordid tale of corruption and greed. Her family, implicated in the kickback scheme, disowned her. The final image the world saw of her was in a bright orange prison jumpsuit, her silver hair now a dull, lifeless gray, being led away in handcuffs. But my mission wasn't over. A personal victory wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure no other family would ever have to endure what we had. I worked with the families of other medically fragile children, with disability rights advocates, and with our state senator. We drafted a new piece of legislation. It took a year of lobbying, of testifying before committees, of telling Leo's story over and over again. But we did it. 1 year to the day after the assault, the governor signed Leo's Law into effect. It made the intentional tampering with life-sustaining medical equipment a first-degree felony. It imposed strict statewide limitations on the ability of any homeowners association to regulate or restrict medical necessities. It was a permanent safeguard, a line in the sand. The final scene of this war wasn't in a courtroom or a state house. It was at the park. The community had voted to rename it. A new wooden sign stood at the entrance, carved with the words, "Thorne Family Park, donated 1948, open to all." Leo was there with me. He had made a near-full recovery, the doctors calling it a miracle. He was a little quieter now, a little more thoughtful, but he was alive. He was laughing, tossing a basketball with his friends, his new, upgraded medical backpack secure on his shoulders. I watched him, and for the first time in over a year, the tightness in my chest eased. It wasn't victory I felt, not exactly. It was peace. The war was over. My son was safe. My family's legacy was protected. It didn't start with lawyers or lawmakers. It didn't begin with protests or policy. It started with a boy, a bag, and a heart that refused to stop beating.